Welcome to State of Mind. This is Julian Royce, and welcome to 2023. Amazing, fresh start to a new year here. Let's see. In today's episode, I'm speaking with the great and powerful Dr. Andrew Schmookler. It was an honor to get to speak with him. Dr. Schmookler is an award-winning author, a summa cum laude graduate of Harvard University, a former Democratic candidate for Congress, and he has written opinion pieces which have appeared in newspapers around the country. And his current work is called A Better Human Story. And I love this. This is a big passion of mine. It's a big reason why I had him on the podcast. And I'm guessing it's a big passion for a lot of listeners of this podcast too. And that is, what is the story that we are telling about ourselves, about our world, about our place in it? And we can look at this at the level of the individual, which is a very important level. And in fact, there's a whole school of psychotherapy called narrative therapy, which delves into this question of how we tell our story and what stories we're telling, and works with that. And in my own work, which tends to be more somatic-based trauma therapy, through accessing and healing things through our body, the stories that our conceptual mind then tells about things can shift and change as we gain new clarity and new insight and new wisdom. So it's an important part of the healing journey on the individual level, but of course we need to look at it at the level of society as well, and increasingly from the perspective of the entire planet, because we now live in this globalized world. Things that happen around the world affect all of us, and we're more aware of that than ever before. And telling the right story can give us the energy, the inspiration, the passion, use that word again, and the insight to see things clearly, to take the steps that we need to take, to turn things around, to create more happiness, more wellness, more peace, more prosperity in this world. And we live in a time and age where it's increasingly difficult to rise above the noise. There's so much information, there's so much noise out there about everything. And we actually need to get above all that and really attune to the voice of truth, of beauty, of goodness. We need to get above all the distraction, see through all the forces that seek to take away our inherent sense of nobility. And then we can tell a story where we're the heroes of the story and where we're making the world a better place. And I think that's so important and so crucial. We need that hope and we need that vision. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Andy Schmookler. So I'm here today with Dr. Schmookler. Andy, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I think we've both been looking forward to this conversation. You have written quite a lot, and so I got to, obviously I didn't read all of it, but I got to read some of it, and I appreciate the scope of your thought and the big picture that you're looking at.
Thanks. I've had more than half a century to try to put a variety of pieces together. So, I've worked at it steadily with a sense of real purpose. So I appreciate what you said.
Yeah, and I know that you went to Harvard, and you also had some political ambitions. Do you want to just share a little bit about your life journey and what you've been up to?
I think that it might be premature to get into the politics.
Okay.
My life journey, well, I mean, I could go back to, the family culture, which placed a very high premium on a variety of things in an integrated way, like understanding the world and being passionately committed to making the world more the way it should be. So I had then at the age of 24, which is to say in 1970, I had a profound sort of visionary experience where I saw something important about the history of humankind, which changed my life and sent me on a path that it didn't seem like I was on that path before that day, and I was completely committed to being on that path ever since that day.
Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that. Could you share a little bit more about that? Like what the circumstances were around it or what it looked like?
You won't have to drag it out of me by with wild horses or anything. On that day I made a promise, and I don't know to what, that I was going to do my very best to develop the idea that had come, and to convey it to my fellow human beings. I say I made a promise because this particular experience is unique in my life. I felt I wasn't just Andy Schmookler thinking. I felt that I was being shown something, and that doesn't. I don't know what that means. My worldview is rational and empirical and somewhat materialist. I look at things in an evolutionary perspective. And here I have this experience which changed my life, and I don't really understand why that seemed so true and important, that I was being shown something. So, as for what I was being shown, I could go to that now if you want. It basically, I just wrote a piece. I've got a forum right now on Three Quarks Daily, which is a very nice platform for me to suddenly have. And I'm writing a series to present my somewhat integrated vision of the human story. And the second one in that series is where I articulate as best I can the core idea that became a 1,600-page dissertation. That's, well, let's see, on the other shoulder, that's on the shelf behind me there, The Parable of the Tribes, published by the University of California Press. So the title of that piece is "The Ugliness We See in Human History is Not Human Nature Writ Large."
Yeah, I love that title.
That wasn't the idea, but the idea proves something from which that follows. And I'm using that line to present something that might draw people into finding out why that's true. Because I think people can fairly readily see that if we understood ourselves to be better creatures than we think ourselves to be, I think people will have some sense that could matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, yeah, I love that. And I just want to reflect back. It sounds like maybe your upbringing, you were more secular, more scientific, more rational, more logical, and then you had this experience that opened you up to something a lot bigger. And I think that maybe is more common than we realize that.
Well, my father called himself a child of the Enlightenment. He was a brilliant man. He died when he was just before he was 49, but he was a good dad to me, and he taught me a lot. And the child of the Enlightenment says that we are to arrive at our truths through looking at the evidence and applying reason to it. So I got the spiritual experience of that nature, and I've just been writing about the 3 spiritual experiences I've had in my life that have changed my life, that have directed my life's work. But once I received or saw, or whatever the experience was, what it was, I then applied to it the intellectual disciplines that my brilliant father taught me as I grew up with him. And so the Parable of the Tribes, while it is a vision from which that spiritual truth about human nature and human history derives, that book has a 33-page bibliography.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah.
So I've tried to bring things together.
I think
and I even have a rational argument, which I've published and which I'll be publishing again on Three Quarks Daily on the 7th of November. I've even got an article that proves, in ways my father would have respected, the reality of the spiritual dimension. It's a new idea to me. It's only emerged as I've been putting the pieces together one more time. But I'd be happy to go in that direction, or talk about human nature, or go anywhere that you want to go from there.
Yeah, great. Well, I just want to name, we're in this age of information. We have access to so much information and traditions and just, everything, and the internet, obviously. And so this project of making sense of it all is so important. and have a bigger perspective in which things
Well, I,
make sense.
another thing we can talk about, which I've been concerned about for half a century or more, is that our contemporary secular worldview has failed to put a lot of pieces together. We see things in pieces,
Right.
and I think the secular culture is content to see things in pieces, and perhaps doesn't conceive that there's even the possibility of seeing things more whole. Anyway, I could go down that road too, because I've given that a lot of thought and I've had a lot of experience of it. Because what I'm trying to show is an integrative vision that makes sense of a lot of things that matter. But the market for that, when I was growing up, there were Freud and Marx had big followings in the thinking world. And they've fallen out of favor, sometimes, in some ways for good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But nobody has taken their place. I see that there's been a change in our intellectual culture where we just see things in pieces.
Absolutely.
We don't have we're not even looking for a perspective on the picture of the human world around us. Freud gave a very well-developed perspective. I mean, he made some important mistakes, but he also got a few things important right. But in any event, he worked very hard to create a system of thought. Marx, somewhat likewise. I was much more enthusiastic about the Freudian system than I was about the Marxian. But I spent, many hundreds of pages refuting them both when I was in my 20s.
Oh, good.
But anyway, I've been trying to offer something that could fill that kind of a space. And it's really been bewildering to me to discover that people are content to see things in a way that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's just one damn thing after another, the world in pieces. And I'm not the first one to observe this. But anyway, there are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to, the need to make the world more whole.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love this. Well, before we get into all that, could you just share with the listeners here, like a little bit about your career path and what you studied at Harvard?
Oh, okay. Well, I've always I've referred to my so-called career. I feel really good about, what I've done with with what I've had to work with. But I'm a very I'm marginal in a way that I wouldn't think I would be. Offering as what I've been offering for all this time, and I've had to learn stuff about the world, and I'm still asking a lot of questions, and I began to give you a little bit of the answer. But there's a habit of mine to try to make connections about things. I mean, I can trace that back to as far as I can see my thinking. At Harvard, I was already, the twig was somewhat bent, but I was on my way to a much more conventional life. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. I was sort of marked to be a star, but something happened in terms of that experience I was telling you about in 1970, where I think it took what I had to offer to a much higher level. But at the same time, what had been encouraged and applauded when I did my best, when I was more conventionally minded, I thought I was giving something much better. And life suddenly became much more difficult. I mean, I've been marginal, not because I was wanting to be marginal. I've been ambitious, But anyway, at Harvard, I did a thesis, which they thought should be published, on heroic tragedy. I worked under two people. I don't know how many people still know these names, but they were big in the time. Erik Erikson, one of Freud's major disciples, and Robert Bellah, one of the foremost American sociologists of his generation, and a pretty profound thinker. Anyway, I worked under them on a project I called A Psychology of Heroic Tragedy, trying to understand why it flowered in Athenian Greece and Elizabethan England in particular. What were the
Mm.
cultural and social and political circumstances that led to tragedy flowering at that time? And asking what is the psychology of why it's considered such an important genre, and then on the sociology of what's going on in society that's working its way through in the enactment of these tragic dramas. So that's what I did
Yeah.
as an undergraduate at the age of 20 or whatever it was. Then I hit a real it was way more. It was. I hit a wall. I won't try for a good metaphor at the moment. Can't come up with it. My life fell apart. My world fell apart.
Yeah.
My dad died. I broke up with my fiance. 1968 arrived. I was living in a new place where I didn't have any friends in Chicago. 1968 arrived along with my draft notice to go to Vietnam,
Wow.
where the Tet Offensive was making the nightmare quite clear and the
Mm.
futility of the thing quite clear, and having to go back to my home in Minnesota to get my Army physical, and then watching as Martin Luther King was assassinated, and
Mm.
then Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. Anyway, I dropped out of graduate school. And anyway, I had a time in the wilderness,
Yeah. Wow.
um, where I was asking myself, why is the world so tormented and full of destruction?
Mm.
I mean, this was the summer where the Soviet tanks went into Prague to crush the
Great.
Prague Spring.
And was
And
this when
when
they had the Democratic National Convention when all the protests?
I was just going to say, yeah, and I worked. I had this great experience working in the McCarthy campaign, Eugene McCarthy,
Yeah.
not Joe, but not that far back, to try to stop the Vietnam War.
Mm.
And I was super invested. I gave 2 months of my life to trying to get a presidential nominee who would stop this carnage.
Mm.
And then Bobby Kennedy got shot, and then there was the Chicago Convention, and the where people somewhat like me were being beaten up by the Chicago Police Department in
Mm.
what was then called a police riot. But
Oh.
anyway, the world suddenly looked very, I grew up in a very sheltered, I don't know how sheltered I should make it myself to be, but I was born in 46, post-war America, the richest society in the history of the world, and we're free, and our politics are working pretty well to get a lot of good things done. And my dad was, working our way up from poverty into a middle class life. And they lived in places that are very decent and made sure I got good schooling. I really had it good. I didn't necessarily appreciate how good it was.
Mm.
I mean, I've learned how much you can't take for granted, but I had it good. And all of a sudden, so I had 2 years in the wilderness asking two things. Why is the world so destructive? And what does it make sense to do in a world that's as out of joint as this one turns out to be?
Mm.
And then that day in 1970, answered both questions in one stroke. This is a truth that this is a truth that explains the destructiveness, and this is your job. Go out and make it and show it.
Mm. Yeah, amazing. Let's see here. And then yeah, it sounds like, I mean, it's such a tumultuous time, and I'm familiar with some of the history, but it's amazing how those conflicts and issues are still so relevant today. And obviously, I think maybe we'll get into some of this later, but
I think there's a need to get into some of the meat. This is about me. We're talking. It's really not about me. It's about a way of understanding what we are, why things have unfolded to what as they have, and what the challenges we face as a species if we're going to survive for the long haul, which is something I think is really up in the air whether we will.
yeah, absolutely. And then just to finish up this piece, you went to Berkeley in the doctorate program. Was it the theological school?
Well, they just gave me the rope to hang myself. I mean, everybody said that what I was wanting to do couldn't be done. I mean, there's stories to tell. First, I went to Yale, and what a disappointment that was. I mean, I just couldn't get the freedom I needed if I was going to keep that promise that I had made. I mean, they told me before I went, oh, yeah, we give people. Anyway, that's a whole story.
Yeah.
Very disillusioning. But then the Berkeley Graduate Theological Union, they basically laid out a scheme whereby I could get my doctorate while keeping that promise if, and then they laid out certain conditions, and they sort of created a program for me to do it and assemble a committee that met their standards, and then have that committee say, yeah, this guy's done work sufficient to get his doctorate. The way I've put it about Graduate Theological Union was, unlike the people who ran conventional academic departments, they thought there might be some truth that was higher than the bureaucratic structures that they had created.
Yeah. Okay. Fascinating. So this spiritual experience.
But to get my committee to get my committee together, I had to go talk to people, academics at the university at Berkeley. I went to see an anthropologist, and he looked at what I wanted to do, and he said, "Oh, this isn't for an anthropologist. You should go to the history department." And I went to soon thereafter, I was talking to a historian. He looked at what I wanted to do, and he said, "Oh, this isn't appropriate for a historian. You need to be to have an anthropologist." There wasn't any place to put the pieces together.
Right. Because the academic world is so divided up into these different little kingdoms, these different little.
Yeah, and the important truths are to be found the more you can put the pieces together.
Absolutely.
It's not even putting the pieces together. It's having them stop being pieces because you're seeing things whole.
Yeah. Well, let's get into your thoughts around human nature, because I love the title of that article you had, and it's a subject dear to my heart.
Which article are you referring to?
The one about that human nature, isn't as ugly as we think it is.
That's what follows from that big idea that changed my life. Okay, human nature. Let me put this out for you. There are two things that I claim to prove to my satisfaction. Okay, and my dad taught me not to be too easily satisfied. One is the idea that there is no human nature is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I could go into why that is. No tabula rasa, ridiculous. And an evolutionary perspective, it makes no sense.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we can't directly infer it from what we see in the world around us. And to explain that, I'd like to conjure up a scientific study. There's so much I don't know about what younger people are learning. But anyway, when I was getting educated, there were experiments by a guy named Harlow. Ring a bell?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
With rhesus monkeys.
Psychological. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad he's still around because it shows something. So I'll tell that very briefly what it shows. He took rhesus babies, divided them into two groups. He kept them away from their mother, but he constructed a structure that would sort of roughly equate structurally to a mother. One of them, they're both, I think, wire cages, but one of them is covered over with terry cloth.
Right.
So one group of rhesus babies is able to get some comfort.
Yeah.
So, and the other one is not. And then there are differences as they grow into adulthood. The ones that couldn't get any comfort from their mothers are a mess.
Yeah.
They can't even do your basic rhesus monkey social behaviors, including reproducing.
Yeah, antisocial and disturbed.
Whereas the ones, they didn't have mothers exactly, but they had something rigged up and they could get a little comfort from the terry cloth. That was enough for them to be able to function basically okay as adults in a rhesus monkey group. So from that, I think what we should infer is this. There are a lot of creatures that are not born finished.
Yeah, yeah, good point.
But that doesn't mean they don't have a nature. Their nature is born, is crafted in terms of the selective process, choosing what can survive over what cannot survive. Gradually, over eons, shapes things like rhesus monkeys and you and me and the sugar maple out there to my right. That creatures like us, I don't think it's true necessarily for bacterium, but what do I know about exactly what kinds of variety that? But they are expecting an environment to complete them.
Right.
The environment should be within a certain range. Not everybody gets a great mother, but in general, you get a pretty good mother.
Right.
Because the people who were the people or the rhesus monkeys that neglected their children, their DNA wasn't going to make it into the future all that well. But anyway, so what's the nature of a rhesus monkey? And I say, well, if you put it in a broken environment that is not well matched to what the creature's nature is dependent upon, then you can end up with a mess like those rhesus monkeys. But they do not show you what the rhesus monkey's nature is. The rhesus monkey's nature is that which they are born with, and as it gets shaped by the environment that they have every reason to expect to fall into, namely a rhesus monkey society, and they've got a mother or they wouldn't be there.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
So likewise with human beings. Mm-hmm. When we look around our world, what we see is, and I don't want to overstate this, but it has a lot in common with that wire, uncomforting. What I try to show is, so I have two lines that I use about what follows from what I try. I try to show that any creature that steps onto the path of civilization and the idea of what civilization is and why it is such a huge new step for life to take. Any creature that steps onto the path of civilization that extricates itself from the niche in which it evolved biologically by doing something unprecedented, namely inventing its own way of life, will inevitably unleash a destructive force that will drive the way that creature's civilization develops in ways that it would not have chosen, did not choose, is not determined by the creature's inherent nature. Yeah. But it couldn't be avoided because it is inherent in the nature of the situation that this new form of life, civilized societies, implies. And there, I could go further in that direction, but wherever you want to go. So we do not see human nature writ large out there because we are living in an environment that's been shaped by a social evolutionary force that wasn't a function of human nature. It was a function of the dynamics of the anarchic system that civilization inevitably falls into.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The experiments with the monkeys that highlighted are so disturbing because they're effectively destroying those monkeys' lives by not providing them with their natural mother. And part of it was that I think he created like a wire kind of mother that would give milk, and then a cloth mother that didn't give milk, in at least one of the experiments. And the babies preferred the cloth mother without the milk to the wire mother with the milk because they could touch and cuddle.
I don't recall that.
Yeah.
But I do want to say that it seems very cruel to have done
Yeah.
that research. I
Yeah.
think that's what you were saying too.
It's very cruel, but
I don't think I don't think that would be allowed now.
yeah, probably not. But we learned from it. We learned how important the mother is and what you're saying, the environment, and how that environment, nurturing environment, shapes who we become, who we are, that we need that to
Yeah,
develop properly.
and in the point I was making, I wasn't thinking about. I was just talking about in the case of us, the environment I'm talking about is not what kind of a mother we have, but that we're living in a human world in which there has been since the beginnings and inevitably a war of all against all,
Hmm.
out of which certain of our cultural possibilities are managed to survive. And
Mhm.
it's not random. It's a new evolutionary process where the war of all against all selects for the ways of power. It selects for just what you would think would prevail in a world in which there's the chaos of a war of all against all. It's a world in which what I call the spirit of the gangster has a disproportionate say in what the human world is going to be like.
Hmm.
And that would happen to any creature that, and I think it's unlikely we're the only ones in the universe that have made that step out of our niche, a biological niche, onto this path. All it requires is that a species eventually emerges that has the creative intelligence to create a different way of life. I mean, everybody else on the planet is stuck in their niche.
Right.
Our hunting gathering ancestors were even though they were already cultural,
Hmm.
they were basically still living in a way that you could see was fundamentally continuous with primate groups like that we had emerged out of.
Right.
It was a niche, even if we were using language and we had tools and we painted on the walls of cave. The size, we were in hunting gathering bands about the same size as a primate group, living in, the same kinds of basic relationships and living off what nature spontaneously provided. It looks in size and structure and the means of subsistence like another primate group, basically. But then with civilization, we end up with this whole new thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're shaping our environment in different ways, like you're saying. Yeah.
And we're not in control of the way it develops. And that's what I claim to have proved. That's what came to me that in one moment in August of 1970, I don't know how that happened. I mean, I said I thought I was being shown something. And I've looked at this thing. It holds water. It just keeps on holding water. It's not the only important truth, but it is a very important truth. And nobody, the interesting thing is I put it out there.
Hmm.
The University of California Press treated it like a big deal.
Oh, wow.
The New York Times gave it a full-page review. So
Wow.
it's not like it never got a chance to get attention.
Right.
And then, well, the Cold War was over. That might have been part of it. But it receded. It receded, it made claims that if they were true, like those statements I was just making, if they were true, that would be important. It was never refuted in the least.
Hmm.
It was not adopted with any, geez, let's try this on, like I had assumed was going to happen.
Hmm.
And it wasn't even being struggled with. I mean, growing up with my dad, I thought, well, if somebody says something important, that if it were true, it would be, it would have major ramifications. People got to, figure out what to do with it.
Hmm.
But it just got ignored after making a minor splash. And I find that really puzzling. That's not the way I thought people approach the question of what's true.
Yeah, you're raising these big important issues, and it's frustrating that the system, so to speak, or society can just kind of ignore it and just kind of move on business as usual.
But it's not just the system. I mean, the system has shaped the thinking world. And I don't understand the thinking world that I discovered existed. I grew up with a dad with a kind of intellectual integrity that I just assumed, My dad's a thinker, and he became a professor of economics, and writer of an important book, and stuff like that. And he had great intellectual integrity. If you made an argument that was stronger than his, he would yield ground.
Oh, wow.
If you prove your point, he would
Right.
yield ground. And I just assumed that was, if you put out something. I mean, I worked for 14 years to get that thing, so it was irrefutable,
Hmm.
you know. And a couple of reviewers said things like compelling. But we do have an intellectual culture, I've discovered, in which it's possible to say something that would be important if true, and have people not cope with it.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's true. What you're saying is true. People ignore it, or they just say what they want to say, or think what they want to think, kind of. Or yeah.
But anyway, I think it would matter if we understood that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be. I don't prove that we're good, or that we're not mixtures. I think I prove that we're better
Hmm.
than we look like on the pages of history, where the spirit of the gangster gets a disproportionate role. I mean, take a look at the world that we're in right now. I think I can explain the unfortunate truth that a man like Vladimir Putin
Mm-hmm.
was in a position to change the world we were living in a very destructive way this year.
Yeah.
That's indicative of a larger truth, that the worst of human potentialities get to play a disproportionate role in how the human world is being and how it develops.
Right.
A monster like Putin,
Mm-hmm.
and a monster like Hitler, and like Stalin. I mean, how many human monsters have you known in your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like that I've personally known.
Yeah, I haven't known any.
I don't.
I
Yeah, I
mean,
was gonna say I couldn't say I've known any like that.
I mean, Trump, for example, is the most flawed, defective, worst human being I've ever seen, really up
Yeah.
close. I mean, he's got every character defect I
Yeah.
can think of, and yet he's been hugely impactful.
Yeah. So I think part of what you're speaking to is if we look around the world, like most people in this country have enough food to eat, have peaceful lives. They're not really afraid they're going to be, shot or killed or imprisoned on any given day. But what I think part of it is that if you look at the movies or TV shows, violence and drama and trauma and struggle are entertaining. And I think that is almost a piece of it, that when we look at history, it's not that interesting to read about 200 years of peace in some valley in China, but it's interesting to read about kings, murdering a bunch of people and
Well, the dramatists say that the heart of any play is conflict.
conflict, right? That's what I'm.
Uh,
So we,
you
we pay
know,
attention. We have a negativity bias. We look at the negative. We pay attention to
well,
the.
we want to see. I mean, we want wish fulfillment, some of us, but we also look to to art to help us deal with the stuff that we got to deal with.
Mhm.
Um, and the human condition is such that there are challenges to it. So, we go to a play, whether it's got violence or not, it's going to have conflict,
Yeah.
because because I mean, I'm a big romantic. I like love stories,
Mm.
um, but you don't want to start with boy meets girl and they're in love and they're happy and just watch that for 2 hours.
Yeah. That'd be boring.
You want the you want Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers eventually to come together, but you want to make the journey with them, because
Right.
it deals with the issues that life has given us as human beings when we're looking for a love relationship that fulfills us.
Yeah.
I know I sent you The Sacred Space of Lovers.
Yeah.
And,
That's one I got to read. That was
yeah.
beautiful. Yeah.
But anyway, one more thing about human nature. you know, I've tried to figure out what our nature is, and I got some guesses that we are not inevitably as good as we could be.
Yeah.
Uh, I've read about anthropological ethnographies of guys who go to some culture, like the forest people, the pygmies in Africa, or go to the Amazon and live with, there's an anthology called In the Company of Man. My impression is that you find some individuals that have developed themselves very well
Mm.
in the state of nature. In other words, where we've been rhesus monkeys that have been born into something like what we were supposed to expecting to be born into. My impression is that there's pettiness, there's generosity, that there's people conducting themselves sometimes better, sometimes worse, and that there are a few individuals that sort of somehow put themselves together rather well.
Mm.
So that's I don't know if if I've gleaned from, my attempt to expose myself to a picture of, whatever we can get about, well, what are we by nature? But one of my thoughts is that with human survival really endangered right now,
Mm.
we sort of have a moral obligation to work harder than we might
Mm-hmm.
to make ourselves more whole. There are a lot of ways of being more whole. I know that you practice and teach some of them, which are,
Yeah.
which are powerful. I've got my own trying to help people to see things more whole. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done in this human world to prevent. I think it's a toss-up whether in the next couple centuries we will get our act together or we will destroy ourselves, either through like a nuclear holocaust of like the kind that might have happened in 1962. A time that the Cuban Missile Crisis, historians think it might have gone the other way. We need to change the human world so that can't keep happening.
Yeah.
And climate change shows another way we could destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
How did we get to the point where we're doing this to the planet, and we've been so hobbled in our ability to respond to it? I mean, I first wrote about climate change in 1976.
Wow.
That's a long time ago. My son's born that year. He's about to turn 46.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
I didn't make it up. I was just reading what the science was presenting. And we know that Exxon came to understand the problem around the same time.
That's terrible. Yeah.
And yet here we are. Well, thank God, we've just passed something which may be a game changer. But geez, all that time we could have been doing something.
Right.
So there's a lot that needs to be ordered better if we care about. I mean, here's a question. I'd like your judgment. If you feel like you got it, how many people do care about whether we destroy something like the human future, whether we destroy ourselves or whether we get our act together? By the way, I think I can demonstrate that it's going to be one or the other.
Oh,
That we aren't going to just be able to muddle through. Maybe that's what everybody thinks. The world it's always muddled through. We're just going to keep muddling through.
But it'll work out one way or the other. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think we wield too much destructive force now to be able to just keep on muddling through. Anyway, I can go there, but anyway, we need to fortify the best parts of our nature.
Yeah.
If we care about whether the human civilization destroys itself and maybe takes down much of the biosphere with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think people, for sure, they care. They can feel hopeless or overwhelmed or so preoccupied with all the problems in their own life and then kind of hypnotized by the capitalist, materialistic world of always wanting more and never being satisfied, that those things feel more important or more, that's kind of what we're being programmed to go after
Yeah,
is
I think that we need, I mean, all that stuff warrants our attention. I think that we need to open up um, uh, a category in our concerns that gets regular impassioned consideration.
Mm.
You know, we are we are determining whether our grandchildren are going to survive or suffer, or well, whatever. Um, I think a lot of people love their grandchildren, um, but they probably don't think about their grandchildren over whom they dote when they think about the issue of climate change or the international order.
Yeah.
This international order that almost took down human civilization in 1962 hasn't changed. We've got Putin in Russia, who's been rattling his nuclear arms in a variety of ways over the last whatever it is, 8 months or whatever it is, and we've got an intensifying possible showdown between the United States and China over Taiwan, in which the Chinese are becoming more bellicose, and the American president is saying we will defend that. Both parties have changed their positions in a way which puts the Cuban Missile Crisis back in mind.
Yeah.
If we keep on just muddling through, it's like playing Russian roulette. Khrushchev and Kennedy managed, that crisis, they managed to, when they pulled the trigger, there was no bullet in the chamber.
Right.
But if we keep on going through, anybody who keeps on playing Russian roulette, spinning the chamber and pulling the trigger, it's not going to go on very long before it ends in a very predictable way. So we can see that these dangers are there, and that the world needs to be changed in order to prevent those possibilities from emerging on a repetitive basis. So we need to do things like ask ourselves, how would the world need to be ordered? Not worrying about, how do we get there yet, but what would be necessary so that we're not playing Russian roulette with the human future and the survival of the life on Earth.
Yeah, it's a big question. Yeah.
And I think we need to then be asking, well, what can we do now?
Mm-hmm.
With that destination in mind, and just acting as best we can in the hope that we'll get to that destination before our not being at that destination wipes us out.
Yeah. Well,
so human nature was crafted to survive in a primate kind of a life. They were developing talents that didn't entirely fit into the ecosystem. I mean, there's some evidence that some species got hunted to extinction. Gregory Bateson said no creature can win against its environment for long. But, even before civilization, there was some destruction.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think thinking about human nature, in the Buddhist teachings, it talks about the fundamental goodness of caring, of compassion. Like if we see a small child or a puppy or something, we have this automatic response of care, of wanting to support life. But then there's what you're saying is the potentiality to go in many different directions. We could develop more compassion or less. Yeah.
I think that's basically the more important point. Not just that we're a mixture, but that we're mostly oriented toward the good. I would demonstrate that logically in a couple steps by saying our nature, our motivational tendencies, what it is that we find fulfillment in, and things like that, are crafted by an evolutionary process which is consistently rewarding what is serving life and survival.
Hmm.
Now, some of that's going to be selfish, and because we're not just going to throw ourselves onto every grenade that goes by. Life isn't trying to create goodness; it's just naturally perpetuating what perpetuates life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what perpetuates life is what's life-serving. And life-serving is at the core of the definition of the good. The human good consists of survival at one level of looking at it, and it consists of fulfillment at the other level. And fulfillment being meeting our needs, and those needs having been crafted to need those things that were life-serving for our ancestors to go after, or that wouldn't have been inscribed in our nature as a motivation. So the good, whatever is in us should be basically life-serving, or at least for creatures that were living in a different kind of world. I mean, the hunter-gatherer is not necessarily crafted to be able to be the leader of a superpower with a massive nuclear arsenal.
Right.
It requires us to, our heightened powers require us to, in some ways, transcend our nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fundamental, the primate who might impulsively strike out with a fist should not be making decisions about whether to launch an all-out nuclear attack.
Right. Yeah.
You want a different kind of structure to be able to deal with that hugely different level of impact on the world around you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, so if we ask this, you're asking this big question about the world order and how to prevent nuclear holocausts from happening, because how we can create a world where we're not living under this shadow of impending doom that's been hanging over our heads for 50 years or however long.
Well, people have been working with these kinds of problems. I mean, there are collective security ideas that go back to the 17th century. I don't, I've looked into this. I could talk about it as if and I have some ideas. I do have some experience in the realm of international affairs. I worked for the Center of Strategic and International Studies for a couple of years. But I really don't know. But the thing is, that it should be a topic of conversation. The survival of our great grandchildren.
Yeah.
If you care about humankind, we are people who are shaping whether there's going to be a future.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that we owe it to the ramifications of what we do with that question that you just asked are so huge that we need to at least be addressing it and discussing it. And it's not like we have no clue.
Right.
One of the things about Putin's invasion of Ukraine is that crucial part of the world had developed into a different, more benign kind of order. That European cockpit had generated 2 world wars in the 20th century. And they had developed into something where, there was a Yugoslavian breakdown that was also kind of disturbing, but not at the same magnitude of the Russian superpower or the nuclear power invading a sovereign nation in a fascistic spirit with a genocidal intent. It just took so much that had been put together, but we already were making progress. And the United States has played a pivotal role in since the United States entered World War II and beat back fascism. We've had huge flaws in our role in the world, but we also have been, in some meaningful ways, the leader of the free world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we helped to create we took steps in the direction of a world in which the danger was less. nuclear nonproliferation, international law, uh, um, international trade, relationships based not on the struggle, the war of all against all, but on the cooperative dimensions of trade. I mean, if you look at the way the world was evolving, there were some positive signs, but they're not nearly adequate, because we can see the Cuban Missile Crisis equivalent can happen right now. So we know we haven't gotten nearly far enough in that direction.
Yeah. Well, I have a question to ask, and I don't know the answer myself, of course, but I wonder if the United States and the other countries in the world had approached Russia with a more, I don't know, almost respectful way, like before this war had started, if there would have been a way to avoid it, if we had acknowledged their concerns, if we had negotiated with them, if we had an attitude of treating other people, trying to enact the best nature in other people, in other countries, even in the leaders of other countries, if that would, maybe that's a little naive, but I think that, there's something to it. Like if we treat other people as enemies, then they'll respond with animosity in kind.
Well, let me say this about that. Now, this is the first time in this conversation I'm going to be challenging to you. I hope
Okay.
you don't. I hope I'm not being rude in doing so, but you lead me to a point that's very important to me, and it's got to do with uh, a defect in the liberal American world,
Okay.
as I see it. Um, there is a huge desire in the liberal world to deal with people as if they were, one could build bridges. And, I was a big bridge builder back in the 1990s. I live in the Shenandoah Valley, surrounded by people on the other side of almost every divide you can think of: political, religious, blue, North versus South,
Yeah.
Jewish ancestry versus Christendom, and I had a wonderful time. I was associated with a group in Washington in the 1980s, which was a polarized time too, called Search for Common Ground.
Hmm.
But what liberal America has difficulty conceptualizing, and that this is a whole big piece of my work in the last 18 years, is the existence of a force of evil. Or let's just say, I define evil as a coherent force that consistently spreads a pattern of brokenness.
Mm.
And I mean, on that same Three Quarks Daily site, I've got a piece up there already called The Discernible Reality of a Force of Evil. And my frustration over the last 18 years has been dealing with the people who are looking at the world around them and not seeing what's right in front of their eyes in terms of the American crisis.
Yeah.
I wrote a piece that I launched my website with in 2005 called "The Concept of Evil: How it is intellectually valid and spiritually and politically important."
Yeah.
And so, to get to your question about Putin, and I don't talk about evil people. I've always got a there, but for the grace of God go I view of things, unblaming, unhating.
Yeah.
But still, this is a very, very broken man. What he's doing in Ukraine is not the first time he has done atrocities. In Syria, he has bombed hospitals. He has gone in to rescue in Syria a guy who wielded poison gas against his own people.
Yeah, you're right.
Rather than deal with some legitimate grievances. He is a guy who did what he could to give the United States Donald Trump as president. He's a guy who has done everything he could to discredit democracy in Western Europe and to fortify fascist parties in the nations of Western Europe.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And I could go on about what everything of what I said points to his nature. What I don't understand about Putin is he seemed to be a great Russian chess player until he made this particular move. And I wonder, how does the guy who played such a lousy hand so well for so long make a judgment like he misjudged almost everything about the situation in Ukraine? He misjudged the Ukrainians. He misjudged Ukrainian leader. He misjudged the president of the United States. He misjudged the response of NATO to a president of the United States. He misjudged his own military.
Right. Yeah.
So what happened to the guy? Anyway, that's the mystery for me about Putin. But that he is a monster who would not have been appropriate to deal with in terms of the bridge building spirit. That's what I discovered doing talk radio here in the Shenandoah Valley. They got transformed by a force that was taking over the right from the people I loved and whose beauty I respected in the 1990s to people with whom became impossible to have a constructive conversation.
Interesting.
I watched it, but I didn't understand, and I still don't understand. I've written dozens of essays on pieces of what might be going on, but it really blows my mind that those good people could have attached themselves to a force that meets my definition of evil, a coherent force that consistently works to make the human world worse or consistently spreads a pattern of brokenness. It's just right out there, right in front of us. And the liberals didn't see it.
Yeah.
The conservatives mistook it for the good, and the liberals kept on thinking this is politics as usual when it was not. They kept on talking about my friends across the aisle. I would hear Democratic senators refer to Republicans who were working right out in the open to overthrow the constitutional order.
Oh, yeah.
You gotta have more than one way of seeing things when there's more than one way that the world presents itself. You got to have more than one tool in your toolbox. When the world could give you different circumstances. I was a bridge builder in the 90s. My book that MIT Press printed in the 90s had a subtitle, A Quest to Bridge America's Moral Divide.
Wow. Yeah, you were ahead of the curve there.
But another force took over the other side.
Yeah.
And it became impossible to deal constructively because they were no longer dealing in good faith. And bridge building had to give way to waging a battle. And that's what I've been spending 18 years trying to do. And you mentioned my running for office. I was a Democratic nominee for Congress against a typical Republican in this very red district back in 2012. Wow. And I ran with my bumper sticker reads, my wife just happened to put on truth nice. For a change. I was laboring under the misapprehension that it was not too late to reach the good people I used to love.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Who used to have so many forms of conservative goodness, but they got transformed, and America's democracy is in danger.
Yeah, it makes me think about this idea of truth as something that different people could agree on, and it could form a common basis, and that's been lost. And I don't know how we get out of this mess that we're in, but
well, there's a vulnerability that cultures can create to the power of the lie. I've thought about it. I mean, this is just one idea. People have had to internalize because we're living in societies that were, these wire cage mothers, these societies that were shaped by the reign of power. We are required by our socialization. By we, I mean civilized peoples around the world now and throughout history, to internalize the demands of our societies. That's great to the extent that they correspond to human needs. But to the extent that they're in conflict with human needs, we internalize something that's hostile to what we are by nature. So people who internalize a harsh morality are going to be faced with this unpleasant thing of having things inside them that are condemned by the morality that they internalized. And a lot of people, especially with very harsh moralities, and I think you know what I'm talking about, resort to a lie, in a sense. They identify only with the harsh morality, and they deny what's inside them that is condemned by that morality. So they say, that's not me. And that forms the basis for things like white supremacy. There's a book called The Killers of the Dream by a good Freudian Mississippi-born girl born in the late 1890s. It describes the role that Black people play in the psychological structure of the white people of the South. Wow. And you can go through a similar analysis with how the Germans projected onto the Jews. So it generates a brokenness in the world. And the lie that is not me creates a whole psychological space in which people can just incorporate all kinds of lies. And you say we can't talk with each other about the truth. Well, right now in American politics, the crucial issue that divides America is whether the election was stolen in 2020 or not.
It's amazing that we're talking about that. Yeah.
And there's no ambiguity in terms of my dad's epistemology. You could hardly hope for something to be more thoroughly proven.
Right.
And it also proves something about a particular person who was willing to, he himself was the guy attempting the big steal.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Where he's accusing the other side of attempting the big, and it's all crystal clear. I mean, it could not be any clearer. And yet these intelligent people whose socialization has made them vulnerable to have a space in them where they are willing to incorporate lies.
Right.
And I don't quite understand how it works, but I can see a correspondence there.
Yeah. Slippery slope of.
And is that human nature? No, civilization can break people.
It shows how fragile our world is and how we depend on shared understandings to exist together and how fragile that can be.
Well, to the extent to which we can make ourselves whole, I mean, that vulnerability is a function of some very fundamental lack of integration at a psychological and spiritual level. So the work that you do with people, if I understand it from what I read, if you make people more whole at that level, the other things will tend to follow.
Beautiful. Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, that's my.
But on the other hand, the brokenness that's out there has been a function of how the world has been broken by this force that we've unleashed through the war of all against all. I mean, it's the web of interconnections of causes and effects is so dense in the human world. But if we trace those connections, we can see something really quite striking. And if I may say that thing, is that okay to go to?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that I have proven. I think my dad would be satisfied with my proof. And this is the fourth piece in that Three Quarks Daily series. The rise of civilization makes it inevitable that creature's world, its civilization, will have as at the heart of its drama something that looks very much like the battle between good and evil.
Amazing.
I really think that is truly a dynamic that emerged inevitably when we took that unprecedented step. And I think it would benefit us greatly to perceive that battle as being at the heart of the human drama. So we're not so clueless about making sure the right side wins.
Yeah, no, your point's well taken. I think liberal people like myself probably, and people who are, study things like Buddhism, which has this non-dual understanding that no one's truly evil, but we could lose sight of the fact that there are super destructive forces that we need to say no to, we need to fight against, and that trying to compromise is just being deceived.
I once I remember it was a yogurt dessert, and this is before I met my present wife, so more than almost 40, it was 40 years ago.
Uh-huh.
A woman said to me that if there is a just God, he will be torturing Hitler for eternity.
Wow.
I say that if I had been born exactly as Adolf Hitler was born, exactly the same whatevers were inside him at that moment, into exactly the same environment that he lived in at that moment, I would have become the monster he became. So I don't think it's illuminating to think of evil people. I think what we need to look at is the systemic force of brokenness, which is what I've spent a lot of words and essays trying to show, that takes the baby Adolf Hitler, whatever was wrong with, he's not at fault for how he's born, I take it. You might say, well, karma. I don't look at reincarnation. So I think of him as innocent of being born the way he was. And I don't think it's his fault that he was born into, Austria of that moment and, in that family constellation, whatever. He's blameless then. And at some fundamental level, that means he's the victim of things that made him into a monster. Similarly with Trump. I know people who hate Trump. I am disgusted by him.
Yeah.
Just like, I'm squeamish about ugly things.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be good at, doing a medical procedure on a leper,
Right.
But I wouldn't blame the leper,
Maybe disgust is the more appropriate emotion than hatred, because
I don't even want that one. I believe in love thine enemies, the teachings of peace on earth, goodwill to men. That's a great recipe for the world. I live among a very Trumpian bunch of people.
Yeah.
It goes 70%,
Wow.
And I love dealing with those people as in everything but their politics.
Yeah.
My wife and I are actually thinking of having two couples from the other side over for dinner, because we both have relationships with the man in one couple, she with the wife in another couple. Wonderful relationships. But there's a part of me which is so disturbed by the fact that these wonderful people are aligned with this ugly thing.
Yeah.
That I have to work not to have too much disgust and not enough love.
Yeah. Yeah. We live in such an interesting time. I can relate to what you're sharing. It really is like showing how different people see the world so differently. Like if.
Yeah, but in the 90s, when I talked with these people, I respected their conservative, traditional, their Christian values, their reverence for the Constitution, their patriotism. They all got articulated in ways that I could respect and value. They had a way of making goodness. But I can't respect what they've become politically now.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of the values that they made me feel were sacred to them.
Mm.
And that's the nature of my puzzlement. I get an op-ed piece every week in this area. I send messages to these people,
Oh, well.
and I basically have asked them in dozens of different ways. How is it that people who spoke so eloquently about the importance of character
Mm.
are supporting something which shows such a blatant lack of character?
Yeah.
How is it that people who were so uh, filled with the value of the Christian values spoken on the Sermon on the Mount, embracing something which can be easily seen is just the opposite of that ethic? Anyway, I don't know that I'm accomplishing anything, but I can't stop some kind of loving these people in that respect, that I can't give up on them.
Yeah. I
But
wonder.
their defects are not human nature writ large.
Mm.
They're part of what happens to a creature when because it's got this creative intelligence, it unleashes a destructive force in the world that will take millennia to bring under control, but it had better bring under control before it destroys itself, because ultimately that is the central challenge that faces any civilization creating creature. Will you order your civilization well enough and soon enough to prevent your destroying yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's well said. Well, it's fascinating. I love your definition of evil, and you've given me a lot of good food for thought here.
I hope I haven't been indulging myself by riffing to the extent that I did.
No, it's been good.
Doing my best to deliver something of value, though there are a lot of things to put together in this picture.
Yeah. Well, I think your understanding of evil as a force, but without identifying it as the specific individual, I think that is part of the path forward, because that's the only way we can redeem ourselves is by, because otherwise you'd have to kill the person, but we don't really need to do that. We just need to change the way they see the world, change the understanding, something like that, right?
And by nature, we should understand ourselves to be oriented toward life and therefore toward the good.
Yeah, yeah,
More than not. And that should allow us to lay down some of the burdens that we carry. I mean, if you are growing up in a culture in which concepts like original sin
right.
and human depravity have played a powerful role over the centuries, at least, you're probably taking on a burden
Yeah.
that gets in the way of your realizing the good potential you've got.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if, and this is a whole nother big rabbit hole to go down, but if part of the picture here is a Christian worldview in which you die and spend eternity in either heaven or hell, and the fate of the world is up to this God that you see as separate from yourself. And so it's not really up to you to try to preserve life on this planet. It's up to you to try to get into heaven or something like that. That could, then you discount the environment, you discount a lot of this stuff. I think that is a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, let me say this about that. I said that I proved the reality of the spiritual dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And my proof is that it is pretty widespread in the human genome. A large proportion, at least a large proportion of people have the capacity for breakthrough experiences that they experiences showing deeper truths. And, I could go on. So, if that, again, see things in an evolutionary perspective. What are the implications of the fact that is that capacity to enter into that kind of an experiential realm is part of our human nature? I think we can conclude that it must have been life-serving, that
Yeah.
those people and those societies that contained that capacity were more likely to pass their DNA into the future than those that did not have that capacity. I think that that's follows,
Hmm.
So if it's life serving, I think that basically, if we look at what people receive in that when they break through into that special realm of experience, will be transformative in the direction of the good.
Hmm.
Now, let's then take a look at that idea that you put out about heaven and hell. One of the things which strikes me is that how frequently religions will say, yeah, and the way you get to heaven, or at least we've got some big religions that do this, the main thing is you believe what we tell you to believe.
Right.
You will go to hell if you don't believe it, even if you're a schmuck. You will go to heaven if you do believe it. And to me, that says, oh, we've got a power game going on here. The force of brokenness that has been generated, a force to make everything in civilization conform to the demands of power, has gotten hold of the spiritual dimension and fashioned out of the religion something which says, we demand your allegiance. So there are, there are things that are beautiful when some people embody some of our religions. I have a Methodist minister friend who's a wonderful human being. But taking Putin and Trump, for example, both of whom are human monsters, both of them have a big establishment religion force behind them.
Right. Yeah.
So I believe in the validity of the spiritual realm, but it is not impervious to being shaped by the reign of power.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's true. Yeah.
Shaped by the force of brokenness.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So
even the ability to facilitate some kind of spiritual or religious experience in someone, they can then be manipulated afterwards into a belief system that, like you're saying, is about power and.
I suppose. I mean, in the piece that I'm writing now, I talk about some of these things, and I close with the three experiences I've had in my life that reached that level in some way or other, and that launched me in a direction different from the one that I was on before it. And then I make the case, this is what came out of that, and this is why I think it's life-serving. So I try to make a case that this combination of getting shown something or having some kind of seeing experience, then combined with developing an intellectual framework to demonstrate the validity of the spiritual truths that were contained, that it does seem to deliver something that can help the cause of life, help human civilization to get its act together, help us find the kind of world that we want to have, which is a world where there's more love than hatred, more peace, less war, more justice, less injustice. I think that that's what people want.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask everybody, well, which would you rather live in? I think it's really, really broken people who would say, oh, I want to live in a world where there's a war of all against all. I think peace on earth, goodwill to men is what people want.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think so. Yeah, I think if you asked 1,000 people, you'd get 999 to agree with that at least. I mean, yeah.
And we shouldn't blame ourselves as a species because we haven't achieved it. I mean, I'm very frustrated that something like the fossil fuel industry, the world as we've got it set up, allowed a fossil fuel industry to cripple us from doing what we needed to do for 40 years. I mean, I've analyzed what some of those forces are, but in any event, that's just a sign. I mean, the fossil fuel industry just behaved the same as the asbestos industry.
Yeah, or the
They're
tobacco
willing
industry,
to
right?
they're willing to kill to get more money.
Right,
But it's the system that
right,
generated that.
right.
How do we reorder our civilization so we don't generate industries that will choose to kill to get more money?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the nature of the challenge. Is there's systemic forces. Evil has got to do not with, oh, we are evil creatures with our original sin and human depravity. No, we are creative creatures that unleash something that we couldn't foresee. And it's only because we had the capacity to invent our own way of life. That made some challenges inevitable.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on the podcast. Like I said, a lot of food for thought and a very provocative conversation. And I'm gonna look forward to reading more of your work, actually. So thank you.
Well, it's very fulfilling for me
Hmm.
to have this conversation with you. I mean, there's a way in which I have failed in my life's mission. When that book was published and got the full page review in the New York Times, oh, okay, I fulfilled my promise.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, not that one, and not the more integrated, comprehensive thing I've built upon that first idea.
Yeah.
It's a mission unaccomplished, and so for you to give me a chance to talk to you and to your listeners, it's like being released from a prison of failure into a chance to embody for a few moments the thing I was supposed to deliver.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's part of the power of podcasting that we can share our message so easily and potentially to so many people.
Well, I hope that for the listeners, it worked.
I hope so too. Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate your time, and yeah, let's stay in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of A State of Mind podcast. I work here in Boulder, Colorado as a psychotherapist, coach, and meditation teacher, and you can learn more about that at astateofmindcounseling.org. You can learn more about the podcast at our website, astateofmindpodcast.com, and you can also get a t-shirt, stickers, a hoodie like this one I'm wearing, and other goodies. Send us a message if you want those. Feel free to send us any feedback. If you'd like to support this podcast directly, you can do that at patreon.com/astateofmind. And another way that you can support the show is just to share it with friends, share it with family, post about it on your social media accounts, leave us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All those things make a big difference, and they're greatly appreciated. And I really appreciate everyone who listens to this, who sends us a message, who shows their support. We are at over 100 episodes now, and it's just been an incredible journey with this podcast. And I'm really looking forward to bringing you more great episodes, great conversations, and great content in the future. So stay tuned, and I will see you here next time.